Welcome to the LinguaFolio Café for Tuesday, March 9th. We're happy to have you here. We've got quite a conversation to have this afternoon, and we're glad you've joined us. As you may remember, our LinguaFolio Cafés are offered quarterly on Tuesday afternoons. We feature guest panelists, and we have 3 panelists here today with us, and then share out time for conversation and further discussion of our topic. We're on our 3rd quarter here, and we are going to talk today about collecting evidence for LinguaFolio. Today's agenda includes a welcome and some logistics to get us started. Then, like I said, we'll feature our guest speakers from around North Carolina. You'll get a chance to see a picture of them and hear them talk a little bit about their background as teachers and implementing LinguaFolio. And then we have some questions to get us started at the LinguaFolio Café about collecting evidence. And we'll finish up our broadcast today with some reminders and so forth. Let's talk about our Webex controls. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sally Stocks.
Thank you and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So we have our Webex controls. You have used the chat. And I hope that everyone is able to send messages to all the attendees and not just only to the panelists, so you can participate later when you have some questions. And we have also our mute and unmute button. I think you can access this at the bottom of the screen. If you don't see it, don't worry, just type everything in the chat. And also we are going to have one interactive poll today via Mentimeter. So if you have a device, it could be on your computer, or if you have your smartphone, type menti.com, and we're going to give you a code in the next slide so you can answer one question. We want to know why you joined the broadcast today. So here we are, we have this slide, and it says, why did you join the broadcast today? And you have different options. I'm going to add, and I see Anne-Marie added, thank you very much. She added the link to Mentimeter. So if you're going to do it on your laptop, you just click on that link that she added in the chat. And I'm going to type the code that is 9927. Ooh, there you go. Marie is on top of this today. Thank you. And you have the code 99275611. And you will be able to see the Mentimeter poll. And we have a few options. You can select all that apply. Access PD for ESL, Access PD for world languages. And I see we're getting some responses already. Thank you very much. Also, you can say if you want to ask a question about LinguaFolio, connect with other educators, earn 1 contact hour for license renewal, gather some information to share with your colleagues, or learn about new resources. So if we click on the icon, Anne-Marie, I think we can see how the poll is being submitted. We have a few options. So we have connect with other educators, 33%, and we have 5 participants who have completed the poll. Let me see how many participants we have today. And I hope that everyone can access. This is a safe tool. You do not need to download anything or provide any personal information. You just click on the link or go to menti.com, enter the code that is in the chat, and then you will be able to participate. So don't worry about adding anything specific about your location or personal information. Okay, so I think we have most of our participants. I see 7 responses. And it changed a little bit. We have now connect with other educators, 26%, and learn about new resources, 21%. Those are the leading options in the poll today. And I see for now, nobody has a question about LinguaFolio. Hopefully once our guest speakers talk today and share their experiences, we can have some questions and share, because that's the goal of our LinguaFolio cafes. Okay, thank you. Thank you for participating. And we're going to go to the next slide. Thank you, Anne-Marie. And I think you want to present our guest speakers today.
Yes, we have 3 guest speakers with us today from across North Carolina. You see Revae, Sarah, and Crystal are all here with us. Interestingly enough, though they're all from different districts and places, they're all Japanese teachers. Japanese is one of the 18 languages we teach in North Carolina, K-12. It is a less commonly taught language, but as you can see, we have a strong cadre of teachers. Revae is also an ESL teacher, as you see, so she does double duty a bit there. I'm going to stop here, though, and let each of them take a turn and introduce themselves, share with you not only what they teach, which you kind of know from the slide, but also a little bit of their background with LinguaFolio and with teaching in North Carolina, what kind of students they teach, what age levels, that kind of thing. So Revae, Sarah, and Crystal, who would like to start?
This is Revae. Thanks so much for inviting us today, Anne-Marie. I'm Revae Bostwick, and as she said, I teach ESL. Mostly I've taught at the elementary level, but I have taught at middle and high school level for a year each as well. And then I also teach online it's mostly high school students. We do have a few in the middle school range, but I teach Japanese online through NC Virtual.
Great, thank you. Sarah or Crystal, would you like to continue?
Hi everyone, I am Sarah Boutin and I work with Revae at NC Virtual. I am a Japanese teacher, conversation coach, and instructional leader. And Revae did a good job of capping a lot of the things that we do at NC Virtual. One of the things that I do actually with all of our critical languages is I coordinate our conversation coaching sessions. And this is where our online students go into virtual classrooms twice a week for 45 minutes each session and do practice activities, play some games. That's all to help them with their listening and speaking. So it's been a lot of fun and I really look forward to working with everyone today.
Great, thank you. And Crystal?
Hi, my name is Krista Molina. I've been teaching Japanese for 18 years. I teach in high school. I'm currently teaching Wake County. Before I was previously teaching in Pitt County. I've been using LinguaFolio since probably we only had paper edition before it actually became offered online. And I guess I'm a big proponent of LinguaFolio and the opportunities that it provides students future down the line.
Okay, great. Thank you all, and welcome to everyone. I'm noticing the chat. There's just greetings going on right now, so that's great. And so we'll go ahead and move forward. We do want to talk about collecting evidence in LinguaFolio today. And you heard Crystal mention there's a paper version of LinguaFolio that's, of course, available for free. There's also an online version. Just depends on what you want to use as a teacher and what your students are comfortable with, which option you take. But collecting evidence is always an important topic. So we've got a main question to get started here, and we'll ask each of our guest panelists to answer it. They can take as long as they need. There are different parts of this question, and depending on how they've used LinguaFolio and how their students have chosen to use it, they might have a variety of answers to share with us. Also, be sure that you're asking additional questions about this topic if you would like in the chat box. So our first question is, how do you describe collecting evidence for LinguaFolio with your students? For example, the purpose of that, matching that evidence with I can statements, the importance of updating that evidence periodically, or other things about collecting evidence. We can go in any order.
Okay, this is Revae. So I have mostly used either the LinguaFolio version with my online students. And what that was basically a digital version of the paper copies. And then I've also utilized the LinguaFolio that's utilized by was prepared by University of Oregon. I believe that's who it's with. And so I've mostly had digital evidence that I've saved for students and not very much with just paper and pencil evidence. When I talk about collecting evidence with my students, what I've told them is that we set our goals, and that's a different cafe, but when we set our goals with students, then we know that we can't reach that goal overnight or just through the use of one assignment. So goals and by meeting those I can statements along the way. So that's how I talk to my students about the importance of collecting that evidence. And I'll stop there for now.
Revae, I'll piggyback off of what you said. This is Sarah. Might be having some tech issues on my end. I apologize. To piggyback on what Revae said, one of the things that I do with the students is I do have them collect their evidence digitally as I'm in an online environment. As far as updating periodically, in our course, we have students complete modules. And at the end of every module, we ask them to make a new entry in their LinguaFolio so they can track their progress and see how they're doing. And I always tell them it's really important to back up what they can do because they want to be able to show themselves and others who look at that LinguaFolio how it is exactly that they met that requirement. So if they can pick something that they're most proud of, especially, I'm not picky about what they put in there. I want them to put something in there that they feel does meet their requirements, but they're also proud of it and it's something they maybe enjoy doing or want to show off. And that gives them a little bit more incentive to keep the LinguaFolio updated, and it's something that they can ultimately be proud of.
I guess I definitely agree with Sarah. One of the biggest, I guess, that one of the biggest keys that I emphasize or aspects that I emphasize with my students when we're doing LinguaFolio is that the purpose of it is not just necessarily to collect evidence, but more of it's exactly what it is, a language portfolio that can show off what their abilities are, what level of skill, they're at, the final products of different tasks and activities that we do, and basically emphasizing the pride, if somebody's going to see this. A lot of times with Japanese, when you go to college campuses, they don't necessarily all have placement tests. It's very few, especially. So with my students, I try to explain, if you build this LinguaFolio, you take pride in it and you put pieces in here that can, showcase what your abilities are. This is a portfolio that you can show the professors and have meetings with them, and they can determine placement. So that's one way that I advise or emphasize the use of LinguaFolio with my students, is that not just, as we're going along, but updating it, keeping it, showing like a historical perspective and making it the best that they can possibly make it, because futuristically it could definitely help them with a professor sitting down, examining it, looking at it, and then them going in and having maybe an interview with the professor, and the professor can see what their capabilities are, not just on a conversation perspective, but reading, writing, the interpretive, and all those aspects.
It sounds like there's a lot to talk about, and we're seeing some questions in the questions box too. For example, when and how do you work with students to set their goals?
I put one answer in the chat box, and that would be that when we're working with our students online at NC Virtual, and if the module at the end of each module, if we have them review their LinguaFolio, then that would be about once every 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how long the module is. It could be even longer if it's a larger module, but then we would go back and have them review their progress towards meeting their goals that they set at the beginning of the semester. And also too, maybe they've surpassed that goal, and they can reflect on their assignments that they have chosen to show off their abilities, and then we can help them if we need to guide them as to whether or not it meets that statement, that I can statement. But a lot of times we let them try to evaluate on their own to see whether or not it meets that.
I agree. I also do about every 2 weeks where I'm having meetings with the students. Obviously with level one, when they're first starting their LinguaFolio, I get them to, when explaining it, going through it, previewing, then they see what they're, I guess, certain things that they can already do and already achieve. I let them start at that point to a certain extent, depending on, like I said, if it's novice low. And then we build and start to set goals, and we review those every 2 to 3 weeks. Well, it's about every 2 weeks. We do it twice a month where we sit down with the students, and I'm saying, okay, well, what is it that you're working on this week? You have met, I set goals of, I try to do within a level. I ask them to do about 10, set 10 goals and accomplish 10 goals within I guess, a level. And they are free to do as much as they want, but they can't do less than 10. So I ask them to do the 10 and just give them an opportunity to they can pick and choose. So if they do about 1 to 2 goals per week, they'll definitely exceed the 10 that I ask them. So I do kind of set goals. I set a limit of goals for them, but I don't set the specific goals for them, if that makes sense.
And I teach the level 1 students in the online environment, and typically we'll have them do their baseline at the beginning of the semester, and they're going to use that to compare their progress as they move through the modules. And we don't have any specific goals in terms of they need to meet an X number of categories where they're going to go up, but I do encourage students, especially the ones who are very motivated to learn the language, that if they're doing other things outside of class, to take that into consideration, because some of their independent self-study materials might help them to meet some of the other goals that maybe we didn't exactly push for in our curriculum, but maybe it's something that they're doing independently. So I always tell them to keep an open mind as they're reading things, because they might be surprised how much progress they've actually made over the period of 2 to 3 weeks where we do our assessments.
So it sounds like you all have different suggestions on how to kind of guide students on setting goals and choosing I can statements. Could you talk a little bit too about the difference between the I can or can do statements in LinguaFolio that they're comparing versus the goals and maybe I can statements that they might use on, throughout a lesson, let's say, or a unit or a module? How are those the same or different, especially when it comes to thinking about LinguaFolio?
For the Japanese program, our lesson objectives are already built into the course, and those were built based on our North Carolina standards for world languages. And then what we have done then is those do compare most of the time with what's in LinguaFolio, but there are some where the wording is different. So it might be a little bit difficult for students to be able to understand what exactly correlates. So we do have to then explain to students or model with students what LinguaFolio I can statement might be met by certain assignments. And I do provide that information to our students within their feedback. Sometimes I'll say, oh, this would be a good piece of evidence for, X I can statement. Or it could be the case where you could automatically just tell the student that, oh, it looks like you have met a certain I can statement based on this assignment. So that would be one way that I try to help students make connections if it is a little bit different, if the wording is a little bit different, and I think it might be confusing.
I'll piggyback off of that. I think the I can statements are what makes the LinguaFolio so user-friendly for the students, because if they were looking at more of a high level of standards, they might get a little bit confused and they might feel overwhelmed whenever they're thinking about how am I meeting these standards. But the I can statements are a lot more straightforward, and it gives students a better way to measure their progress. So by having that, it makes it a lot easier for the students, and they're more eager to engage with the LinguaFolio rather than just having a set of standards that they might not quite understand.
I definitely agree that they are very user-friendly, very simple to understand, and very direct and to the point. So the students know exactly what it is that, they need to accomplish. It's very, very simple.
So we've talked a little bit about collecting evidence and describing that to your students and using can-do statements. What about branching out from there? How do you describe collecting evidence or the use of LinguaFolio, let's say with their parents or guardians, or with other teachers or with administrators? How do you broach that topic and what do you say?
I guess for my school or my district, we are using portfolios that the students have to use for every subject, every class. And this is the option that we do for our world language at our school. So this is something that is very easy for us to kind of incorporate. The parents can see, and a lot of the times I'm using not necessarily the one from Oregon, but using the ones that have been provided, the documents that have been provided online within our Google Drive. So we've been able to kind of bridge it to where families, parents are very aware of the portfolio because we're doing it school-wide, district-wide.
I can say for me personally, with the online NC Virtual, I have not shared that with parents, but with ESL instruction with my K through 5 students, in the days when we could have student-led conferences, that would be a time when students could take out their portfolio and show their parents what they've accomplished so far in the language. Unfortunately, this year we're not having those type of student-led conferences, but hopefully again in the future we can do that.
At NC Virtual, we have parents interface accounts where they can create their own independent login and check on the student's progress at any time. And one of the things that they can do is look at the student's LinguaFolio and be able to monitor their progress. And then because the students upload things digitally, the parents would have access to those. So they can access them. That's definitely something that they could do at any time. And then one of the other things that I have written to students about the LinguaFolio and why we use it is that it's something that they can truly show is how they're meeting their goals and their objectives and how they're moving up in the language. So not just with parents per se, and potentially other university professors that might look at their progress they made in high school, but also thinking about the younger generation, the Zoomers as they call them coming up. It seems like more of them are looking at alternative paths other than just going to a traditional four-year university option after high school. So they could potentially take this to a trade school, a job interview, if they're going right into the workforce, and be able to say, this is the level of language that I've acquired since I've been working with this language since whatever grade. And that could potentially give them a leg up over their competition. So that's another way that I've really encouraged students to think about if they're taking this to a real world application, they want to make sure that they're choosing evidence that demonstrates that they have met these I can statements rather than just saying them, they've got the evidence to back them up. And I think, again, that could really help them out in a real world situation.
I'm checking our chat box to see if we have any other questions coming in.
Well, I wanted to add one more thing. With the LinguaFolio, I feel like it's another opportunity to differentiate instruction. So you have some students that are going to take the LinguaFolio and try to do every I can statement that's listed up there. You may have some that'll try to do certain things but not push too far. And then you'll have some that just do bare minimum. So to me, I look at the LinguaFolio as an opportunity to differentiate that instruction and to provide opportunities for the kids that need or want to exceed all the expectations. You know, kids that are going to meet the expectations and kids that may need a little bit more, I guess, support in order to just, you know, get to that meet expectations level. So the LinguaFolio, you know, with parents, with the community, with other teachers and in the other classrooms is definitely beneficial. But it's also a way that the students can kind of learn to become independent learners as well.
All right. I'm checking again. Before we go on to the next question, I guess what I'd ask each of you to think about is, what one piece of advice would you give teachers who are just starting out with LinguaFolio about collecting evidence? What should they always remember or think about when they reach that stage with their students and talk to them about collecting evidence?
My piece of advice would be to not focus on the amount of time that it takes. And I know that we feel like we have so much we need to cover in a short amount of time that collecting this evidence is not a waste of time, but you think that you could use your time better. But I would like to just say that collecting evidence gives students a chance to feel proud about the work that they have done. It gives them more motivation when they realize that they've met goals that maybe they didn't think they had already. And they can just really see their progress and understand that the work that they're putting into learning the language is actually beneficial for them. And I think that not taking time to reflect on the fact that they're making progress would actually hinder progress in a way. So definitely it's important to take the time to allow students to feel that confidence and that pride and to see their accomplishments.
I would definitely agree with that. My suggestion would be right alongside of that is that if you can get the students to buy in and understand the importance of LinguaFolio and what it provides and what it does, the students, when they find that pride in it as well, I guess sky's the limit. So I know it does, like she was saying, it does take a lot of time, but understanding that this time can deem such a large outcome. If you can get the students to understand that and buy into that, they can, sky is absolutely the limit.
I think both Crystal and Revae gave great advice. What I would also add to that is don't be afraid to give students examples as to how they can use an assignment to back up that they've met their I can statements. But again, don't be afraid to keep it open-ended, because sometimes I've had students attach something that I was kind of surprised to see that on here, but I could see how that would demonstrate that they've met an I can statement. So by giving them the autonomy and the ability to really own their LinguaFolio, I think is a good way to get them engaged with it. So they're collecting the evidence that is meaningful for them, but also meets the requirements in order to show that they've met their I can statements.
All right, this is great advice. And we're seeing some thank yous and love that in the chat. So I hope you're able to see that. I am watching our time and we're right on track. So we'll go ahead to the next question. And you've already talked a little bit about this, but you might want to get into some additional details, particularly with the different ages of students that you teach or the different levels of courses that you teach. So how much freedom do you give students in collecting the evidence for their LinguaFolio? And how do you guide them and narrow their options or open it up wider? But what do you think about when you go to work with a group of students or even individual students when it comes to that?
So I give my students a lot of freedom, but especially thinking about some of your age groups. While I do teach level 1, I will sometimes have students as young as early middle school and all the way up through seniors in high school. So I do like to give examples because if you're just kind of having it out there and it's kind of a free for all, sometimes students might get a little confused and not understand what to do. So we don't want to frustrate them. And I think it helps to give examples as to how they can attach and include evidence to show that they've met this. But it's also good to, again, let them have the autonomy, let them own their LinguaFolio. So I, for example, would not require, say, that they need to put a sample of a particular writing assignment in. If that's not something they want to include, I don't force them to do that. But I might recommend, you did really well on this particular writing assignment. This might be something you might want to include. So I might put some basic instructions like that or suggestions. But again, I'm not really forcing them to include anything. I just like to give suggestions and let them own it.
And I would say that's to the extent of what I do as well. They have pretty much 99% of the freedom. I leave that 1% because I do make suggestions, but I don't mandate, and I will never tell a student, no, this doesn't work, you have to change, but I just make suggestions. If I want them to be proud of it, I definitely don't want to be negative about it in any means, but I can say, hey, well, this might be great for this one. Well, what do you think about? So just guiding. I do a lot of guiding, a lot of talking to them. But I'll never mandate or ask them to change anything. It will always be suggestions because I want this to be their showcase to show what they're capable of doing, what they're comfortable with doing. So that's the most important part of it to me is not necessarily, oh, well, they made a mistake and they got confused, presentational speaking with interpersonal, and so on. So just making those suggestions and fostering it has been very, very helpful. So some of the students that will take 100% control of it and run with it do a really, really good job. Some of the other students I'll have to sit down and work with, but them collecting their materials, their work, their outcome, their products, I want them to be proud of it. So they have the freedom.
And I concur what both of the other two panelists have said as well. And I am the same way in terms of I don't limit what they can post as far as what they want to show as their evidence. But there has been a time, I think I had one student in the past where he had his evidence collected and it was, probably about a novice mid-level, and he was checking himself off up to like advanced high or something that was really quite above where the expectation, he had a very high expectation, I guess, of his abilities. So we talked about it a little bit and asked him to show me how it was meeting that I can statement. But I definitely would never tell him he cannot put that as part of his evidence, but I might say, okay, what could we find that shows this more high standard that you're looking at? And we have, depending on which version of LinguaFolio we're using at the time, we in the past have had them include their outside experiences. And many of the students are learning things for us teaching Japanese through animated films and series. And so they'll talk about learning greetings and learning certain phrases within those. And so they've come away with it and it's not come from the classroom. So I think it's fine to include that type of experience because it might provide them with a resource that helps accelerate their learning.
Let's talk a little bit more about experiences outside of the classroom, because that's something that we always want our students to be seeking out and finding and using in different ways. And we know that can be things like films, like you just mentioned. It could be learners of the same language, maybe students who are older, more advanced. It could be people in the community, if you have a heritage community nearby who speaks the language that the students are learning, or it could be an immersion experience of some kind that's happening, let's say, with ESL, because they're interacting a lot with English when they're outside the classroom as well. So talk a little bit about those experiences outside of the classroom and how your students pull that in as evidence for their language learning.
there have been times where they just listed it on the document as part of their outside experiences. We had, when we first were using LinguaFolio in the course, they were having a hard time relating to this outside experiences because some students really didn't have any outside experience. So they were just a little bit clueless as to what they should put for this outside experience. So it takes some guidance sometimes, some suggestions. Just for example, the ones that you mentioned, Anne Marie, maybe have you learned anything from, you know, those types of experiences you mentioned? So I guess giving them those examples, and then also to giving them some opportunities to experience those and actually have and participate in those types of experiences. We have some culture cafes that we call them, where students can log in and can listen to different types of cultural events that happen around the world. And so that would be one way that they could gain some experience and access some foreign language topics and experience that maybe they wouldn't otherwise. So I think we need to make sure that they are aware of opportunities that are available to them in the community or online, so that if they don't have an opportunity or haven't been exposed to that kind of experience thus far, that they could, you know, branch out of their little community and see more of the world this way.
And now that we're living in the age of YouTube and the internet in general, it's a lot easier for students to expose themselves to more things related to the language. A lot of times the students come to me and say they have an interest in learning the language I teach, Japanese, because of something related to pop culture or contemporary anime and things like that. So I want to encourage them to just expose themselves as much as they can. I will write in my feedback that now that they've completed an assignment, for example, that they're able to maybe watch some anime, or maybe they can read a title entirely in hiragana now or katakana. And again, that's that real connection that they're able to make. So I do encourage them to write things in their LinguaFolio if they've encountered any of that type of thing in their travels, either online or maybe potentially even in their library. I always tell my students to check out the children's books areas, because they might find some fairy tales written in Japanese or books for kids that they might be able to engage with. And again, it's not all about always understanding everything. It's about getting some extra exposure. So I do encourage them to put things that maybe are a little bit non-traditional into their LinguaFolio if they feel that that helps them to meet their standards.
All right. What other questions do we have? Or I could say our panelists as well. What other kinds of things do you want to share about collecting evidence that we haven't asked specifically about?
This might go back a little bit more to advice I would give to a teacher that's new to the LinguaFolio, but I tell my students, honestly, just to have some fun with this. I know that it might seem like it's kind of serious because we've got this form that we use and there's a lot of text on it, but I want students to have fun with it, to be able to take a look and say, okay, I'm making progress in this language, because they are working very hard. Especially like a level 4 language like Japanese, where it takes students a lot more time and effort to move up the levels of proficiency. So we need to make sure that they're able to see their progress. And whenever they have hard evidence that they can put in there to back up, again, it does give them that sense of accomplishment. And ultimately, I think that it helps them to continue with their studies. And they're less likely, I think, to give up or maybe just stop taking it whenever they get to the higher levels, because they're able to see their progress. So I definitely recommend to encourage students, as well as teachers who are using this, to just have some fun with it and leave it more open-ended. Let students choose things that they like and make it something that they can potentially have some fun with, rather than another assignment that they have to mark off as complete.
I definitely agree with that. That's great advice. I would definitely say that in the beginning, when you're looking at LinguaFolio, it seems like so much preparation. You have to worry about this, but majority of the I can statements you're already doing as a teacher. So you're providing the students the opportunity already to kind of create products and evidence for the LinguaFolio. The LinguaFolio to me is just a matter of organizing. Those tasks and those products that they're creating. So it seems like it's a lot of trouble. The only thing that I would say that's time consuming is meeting with the students, reviewing the evidence, those aspects of it, but it's really, really, it has great rewards.
And I agree as well, especially when it comes to the students that are in secondary, in your high school classes, that it seems that sometimes for them, it's a little bit more difficult to motivate them to want to do what appears to be just one more thing. And so I think it's just important that we emphasize and get them motivated. So emphasize the importance of it, the purpose of it, make sure they're aware of the purpose of doing all of this quote unquote extra work, but then also to help them understand the benefits of it. And I think that's why maybe reviewing it every now and then to show them the importance of having this portfolio of evidence will help them grow in the future. So I think that just trying to get them motivated, get, as Crystal said earlier, the buy-in, and just trying to get them to take ownership of it and not being forced to do it. We need to make sure that they can get that intrinsic motivation happening to do it as well.
This is a lot of great information about collecting evidence and using LinguaFolio, and as you said, getting student buy-in and getting them to become very autonomous language learners as they progress and mature through the language learning experience that they're having in schools, but then out into the world outside of our classrooms. I'm checking again for any questions or anything that anyone's asking. Please notice in the chat box that Sally has added a link to the last LinguaFolio Café, where we talked about setting goals and choosing can-dos. That featured some of our same guest speakers today, as well as some others. So you can always check out those materials. We do post all of that. Also, several of you have talked about the materials in for LinguaFolio. Oops, hang on. We do have one question in particular. Can you give us some examples of some interpersonal evidence that you liked?
I had a student attach an example from a speaking assignment we had them do where they were asking their partner some questions and then their partner would ultimately answer their questions. So I had that student attach a snippet of that conversation. And I thought that was clever that she chose that particular assignment to show that she's had that interpersonal interaction.
For interpersonal evidence, I always encourage my students I know that video seems very, very easy to do. And I prefer video, but just for the sake of using somebody else's face and so on, I always ask them to just do audio clips of interpersonal evidence. So I will give them kind of like a topic or subject, whether it be in a integrated performance assessment, and they feel like, oh, well, my portion of it was good, then they'll use their recording. So even when we're doing our interpersonal or our integrated performance assessments, I'll record their voices and then they can choose whether or not they would like to use it. So typically with the interpersonal evidence, I kind of give them the leniency. If they don't like what we've done for assessment or for tasks in class, a lot of them will kind of gravitate to, grab a partner and say, hey, are you trying to get this goal accomplished? Do you want to do a conversation? So the students will kind of, like I said, they take their own initiative in order to get this done. If they don't like maybe the opportunities that I've provided the students. So mostly all the I can statements and the evidence that I'm asking them to input, I try to provide them opportunities to obtain that. But if they don't, then usually the students don't mind stepping out of the box and kind of doing it on their own.
That's a good idea. Maybe, and if you have students face to face and they can be in the classroom together to have a conversation, could you use maybe Flipgrid or Loom and just blur out the students' faces if you needed to provide a quick link to be able to have that as evidence maybe?
I think we may be having some tech problems, but yeah, that sounds like a good idea. There are a lot of tools out there that, you know, are even matched sometimes to our communication mode. So they're interpersonal tools like she just mentioned that can be brought into the classroom easily and freely because they don't cost anything. So that's always an option. Well, while we're still thinking about this and thinking of any other questions we want to ask, I'm going to move us along, but I want our guest panelists to jump in on this next part if they'd like to. We always talk about accessing our LinguaFolio classroom materials, and several of you have mentioned about how you've used the paper materials, you've used eLinguaFolio back when we had the online version of LinguaFolio just for North Carolina, and you used LinguaFolio Online, which is what we have from the University of Oregon, but it has also been customized for North Carolina. Our LinguaFolio materials are housed on the Google site. You see the link here. And there are resources for world languages and English as a second language. And really the only difference is the I can statements and which proficiency scale they're arranged on. And then LinguaFolio Online, of course, has materials for both. And so we'll explore that a little bit. I have put the link to LinguaFolio Classroom Resources page in the chat box. You can go right to it. I'm just going to click on our bit.ly link, bit.ly/nclf home. And it takes us out to the website. Up at the top, we have a drop-down menu for classroom materials. And then LinguaFolio Online for NC has its own space. So if we start with LinguaFolio for ESL, you see that we have the overall LinguaFolio, the 3 different parts then, where you can download them piece by piece. And then the biography components that you can download individually as you need to in both PDF and Word. And we do have those can-do statements like we're talking about, and we have them done up the way they're done with the national grid. We have them also done so that they align to our North Carolina Standard Course of Study for both ESL and world languages, whether you're teaching an alphabetic or logographic language, a classical language like Latin, or a visual language like American Sign Language. And so they're all there. And then, like I said, the can-do statements vary a little bit simply because there's 2 different proficiency scales. ESL uses the TESOL, Teachers of English to Speakers of Other Language Proficiency Scale, and World Languages uses the ACTFL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages Proficiency Scale. So we have those laid out. And then on the World Languages page, very similar. Again, the 3 different components of LinguaFolio you can download on your own. The biography components separately as PDF and Word documents, our proficiency grids and that kind of thing, and then our can-do statements by proficiency level on the different scales. And I heard several of our panelists mention that they sometimes download these materials and then upload them to like a class or school Google Drive or maybe another LMS of some kind so students can get to them. Do our panelists want to kind of talk about making these materials accessible to students and how you do that?
I have created a folder that I send or I give to the students for them to make a copy of, which houses the biography, the dossier, the passport, and then usually if it's level 1, then I'll put novice low. If it's level 2, it'll have the novice low, novice mid, and novice high. Usually, so as we go along, then I'm just giving them the document, asking them to put it into their folder, make their own copy. And so that's typically how I've been doing the Google Drive version of it, because that's what our school uses for them to do their portfolios for all their classes. So each of the students has, for their world languages, they have a folder with these documents in them, and I provide those documents. So I already have it as a template or a folder that I can share with the students, and they just have to make a copy of their own.
For us with NC Virtual, when we had it before using the eLinguaFolio, it was already set up as an assignment in our Canvas course. And so there was already a copy made for each student that they would just have to complete when we had all of those documents to use.
And like we mentioned, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to brag on Revae a little bit because she created a really easy to use Google form with the statements all set up for the students, and we have been using that this semester. It's going extremely well. And then for their evidence, we're just having them upload to the assignment, so that way they have everything that they want to upload as evidence housed in one spot for them.
Yeah, that's a great idea, sort of arranging things as you like the students to encounter them and then sharing those with other teachers who teach the same classes or in the same program. That's great. All right.
Anne-Marie, are you going to talk about this, the Linguafolio Online for North Carolina?
Yes, we're going to talk about it. Would you
Okay.
like to go ahead and jump in and do so?
Well, I was just going to say that I did get the opportunity to use that for a couple of semesters with students, and it was very user-friendly. And for our students now who are so tech savvy and just like to, do some clicks rather than doing some manual typing, they could just click. I think that it was very user-friendly, and it gave some nice reports and a nice overview of your class for the teacher to be able to see where the students are as a class and not just look at individual students. So I just really liked the interactivity for both the teacher and the student with this.
And she's right. The Linguafolio Online, or what we call LFO for North Carolina, has been really helpful. It is available as an app for our students who are using it as a language learner. For teachers, the interface is online, so on your computer or that kind of thing. But it is very user-friendly, and it brings together all the things we have in the paper or electronic documents that you saw, but just in an online format. And so we did do a lot of work with this. When we transitioned from the eLinguaFolio, which is what we had initially, we were the first state in the country to ever have LinguaFolio online in that regard. But over time, we outgrew that software that had been built for us. And so we linked in with the University of Oregon here. You can see that they have a language resource center called the Center for Applied Second Language Studies, or CASLS is how we pronounce the acronym. And they created a customized LinguaFolio Online for North Carolina. And what that means is we have all the things that anybody else would have in LinguaFolio Online, but we also have the can-do statements that we created here in North Carolina for ESL learners using that proficiency scale as well. And we have a situation where we have the I can statements being read out loud in different languages if students want that kind of support, particularly if they're in ESL programs or they're in dual language immersion programs. And so we have said that CASLS can certainly share those materials with others who use LFO. We made them to be shared. And so those are available for everyone. You see here a little synopsis of our transition into LFO for North Carolina. There is a bit of a cost, and initially when we were piloting this and getting everything set up, we covered some of the costs, but the costs are about $1.50 per student to have LFO. And of course, that covers what you would think it would for an app, you know, keeping it updated, managing the service and so forth of the University of Oregon. So if you want information about that, you're certainly welcome to it. It's available here. And there are even instructor tutorials and student tutorials, sort of manuals, if you will, about how to use LFO and how that's sort of different from how it might be used as paper or electronic documents of some kind. So how to do all the things like upload evidence and so forth.
And some schools, individual schools may be willing to pay for the student $1.50 fee. So I would recommend you guys maybe talk to department head or administrator to see if that's an option, if this is something that you would like to do.
I will say too, with LFO for NC, part of having our own customized version and making sure we have a login is that when a North Carolina teacher wants to establish LFO for their students, you work with the University of Oregon directly, and they even help you troubleshoot when you have tech problems. But it's already set up so that all of our districts and charter schools and schools are programmed into the system. So there's already a space for them. So that you can get like join codes and login information that's already customized to our North Carolina organizations. That includes higher education, by the way, and even some of our private or independent schools. So we made sure that that was available for everyone. All right, well, I put the link to that particular page on the Google side in the chat box too, in case you'd like to check that out. I am conscious of our time. We do want to wrap up on time today. So let's start by thanking all of our guest panelists for sharing today about collecting evidence and all of the wisdom that they have gained over time with using LinguaFolio with their students. We really appreciate you letting us know the lessons you've learned and also the impact this is having on students and their language learning.
Thank you for letting us join today, and also to apologize for my own, this is Revae, for some brain freezes. After testing for ESL access testing the past 2.5 weeks, my brain is kind of dead. So thank you so much for letting me join today.
Sure, and it has been an interesting time for all of us, I think, particularly with testing going on now for our ESL colleagues, but we're forging ahead, so that's good. So let's go ahead and wrap up our time today, taking a look at some other professional development and training for LinguaFolio in case you're interested. Of course, we have the LinguaFolio webinar series in addition to the LinguaFolio cafes that we do. You see the ones that are grayed out are the ones we already have done, and those archives are posted. But you are welcome to join us for the next one, our end of the year webinar, which will be on April 8th. I'm putting in the chat box right now a direct link to the LinguaFolio webinars page. So you can go there and register for that if you want, and also see the archives from our past presentations. One of the things that we feature in the LinguaFolio webinars are the biography components. And so several people talked about today, you know, having that summary document about you know, where students are as they've worked across a course level or a year in a course. And we're going to talk about a biography component that looks specifically at that for the end of the year broadcast. And there's also an intercultural document and things like that that we're going to look at. So some of these pieces of LinguaFolio that you can use to have students capture outside experiences into their language learning are part of that biography. So that's Thursday, April 8th from 4 to 5 p.m. Also, we have the Introduction to LinguaFolio training that we have often done at conferences and other locations face-to-face in the past. It has been available now as a self-paced Canvas course since last July. Plans were already underway to make that a possibility even before the pandemic, but we are so grateful now that we have that, because if you want to do the Introduction to LinguaFolio training, you can do that totally online. You don't have to wait for a conference or a special training that's announced. It's available for free to everyone. And so what you see pictured on the screen is the what you will find on the Canvas course page that I see Sally has already put into our chat box, so you can link right to it. But you'll find instructions on how to register for the self-paced course in Homebase if you're part of the you're a K-12 educator at NC Public Schools. And the other one is if you're a K-20 educator outside of our public school system, you can still get this Introduction to LinguaFolio training because we've made it available as a Canvas course in Canvas Commons. Likewise, if you want to use it in like a PLC or some kind of local training, you can download the Canvas course yourself and do it as instructor-led instead of self-paced. So a lot of flexibility there with your training. Also, our LinguaFolio Café will be archived. We've been recording this whole time, so we'll post the archives. And the archives from the first 2 LinguaFolio Cafés about implementing LinguaFolio and setting goals and choosing can-dos are posted there, as Sally had indicated, I believe, earlier. And then finally, our last LinguaFolio Cafe for this year will be on May 11th. The cafes are always starting at 3:30, and we'll be looking at using the passport part of LinguaFolio to move on to next year. So as students wrap up the year, we'll be hearing from guest panelists about how they help students use that passport to move on to the next year or the next opportunity, because you heard several of our panelists talk about sharing LinguaFolio and what students have in it with professors at the college level for placement, or employers, or in job interviews and different things like that. And that's it. We thank you. I'm Anne-Marie Gunter, the World Languages Consultant, and of course, Sally Stocks is with us as well, my ESL Title III consultant who works on LinguaFolio. We appreciate you joining us today. We hope you've learned something that you can use with your students right away in implementing LinguaFolio.